Chapter 7.3 is about more multiplication properties of exponents. Today is just another step in working with power properties. Again, just getting right to it because this section or this portion of the chapter is pretty straightforward. Again, pay attention to what I'm doing because your first couple questions on homework will look like this. When they want you to simplify x to the fifth going to the third, again, today's work is going to have a power going to a power. And so what you will do, or at least when you expand it out, is you'll expand the inside exponent first, which means that you'll turn that into 5x's going to the third power. This third power, of course, means that you'll have this 3 times. And again, that's how you want to type it in. And when you go to simplify that, you'll count up all your x's, of course, 5 here, 10, 15, so your final answer is x to the 15th. Alright, so that is your new rule, or at least the new rule that you're going to be using, which is pretty much power of a power. So it's when a power is going to another power. And again, the rule today is that when you're taking a power to another power, you simply multiply the exponents. Now, what we've learned so far is that whenever we have something, again, you don't need to write this, but whenever I have x to the second going to x to the fifth, we add these two up to get x to the seventh. But the easy hint for me is that whenever I have the power being separated by a parentheses, remember parentheses usually means multiplication like it does here. If there is a parentheses separating it, it's kind of like a distributive property where the 3 drops down to 5, making it 15. However you do it, just make sure again that you practice understanding what is going on, because that is a very important process for you to know. So let's just look at some examples again so you can begin your practice. Again, make sure you pay attention to the work that I'm showing because there are a lot of questions on your homework that require for you to show work on your Math Excel. So what you will do here is not just answer it, you will actually write out or type out x to the 15th times 8, because again this is like a distributive property, and then you will do 15 times 8 to get the answer of 120. So this actually equals x to the 120th. And that's all. Again, this 8 on the outside of the parentheses just floating around is going to drop down and multiply by whatever the power is on the inside, and that is all that there is to it. Alright. Looking at example B, same start. Again, what we're going to do is take this problem here and drop our negative 8 down to 13, so we end up with x to the 13 times negative 8. Again, you want to make sure you write it that way because that's pretty much how it's going to be on your work. 13 times negative 8 gives me the answer of negative 104, so that turns into x to the negative 104. And as we've learned, we cannot have negative exponents, so we need to move this unhappy x because a negative exponent means it wants to move, and that turns into 1 over x to the 104th. Alright, so again, just keep that in mind. All the stuff that we've been doing still comes into play. All the rules that we've learned still come into play. The only difference is now you're going to have some problems that have powers floating around on the outside that you need to deal with. When you look at C, same thing. The only difference is I've got 2 parts here. So again, the negative 9 is going to drop down to here, which makes B to the 1, because remember there's an invisible 1 there, times negative 9. And then E to the negative 15 times negative 9. That becomes B to the negative 9th, E to the 135th. And again, as a rule, you cannot leave any negatives, so what that means is that this variable does not want to stay where it's at. So the E to the 135th stays here, and B to the 9th ends up on the bottom, with this being your final answer. Again, all the rules that you've learned so far stay the same. You just now have to make sure you make the proper decision in terms of simplifying them, and make sure that you get used to what's going on, because again, that's where all the mistakes happen. This is why I've been telling you that you need to make sure you practice and study, because you have to know these things automatically quickly. Simplifying this one, it ends up as r to the 4 times 5 over 8. You do have a calculator that allows you to do 4 times 5/8, which makes 5 halves. The trick is to make sure you have it reduced. Now, if you don't have a calculator, you need to remember that whenever you take 4 times 5/8, that the number multiplies up to the top, making 20 over 8, and then you have to reduce that, and that is where you get your 5 over 2, because both of these can be divided by 4. 20 divided by 4 is 5. 8 divided by 4 is 2. But again, just keep in mind that you need to make sure you remember to distribute or drop or multiply that outside power to every power on the inside. On C, I didn't get to write it, but again, the 9 drops to the B. It also drops down to the power on the E. It's kind of like a distributive property, and again, the hint for distributive property is the fact that that power or exponent is on the outside of a parentheses. When the exponent is attached to a number, it's going to be added by whatever else is there, but again, this here, because it's on the outside of a parentheses, means that it is going to drop down to everything in there. Looking at example E, you have, again, the negative 4 going down, so 8 to the 1, times negative 4, because we want to make sure we remember that it is the power of 1. And yes, my work is going to make you do that. And then d to the negative 8 times negative 4, which turns into 8 to the negative 4th d to the 32nd, which from there turns into d to the 32nd over 8 to the 4th. And because you can actually use your calculator to evaluate 8 to the 4th, you will do that and get the answer of 4096. So that means that your final answer is d to the 32nd over 4096. Again, one step at a time. Make sure you understand the distributive part first. Multiply 4 by 1, multiply negative 4 by 8. That's the first step you need to show. Simplify the multiplications, making negative 4 positive 32. From here, we don't like a negative exponent, so we move it to the bottom. And the last step is to simplify that number down to be what it's supposed to be. Again, this is not something that should be overlooked as being easy. So again, you want to make sure you're practicing and learning this stuff as much as possible, asking questions whenever you get stuck, because there are a lot of small errors that you don't know that you make until you take the quiz or the test, and you want to make sure you're ahead of that curve whenever the quiz pops up, especially this week. For F, here's what you want to make sure you do. There is no work on this, but here's what you want to make sure you understand. This is broken into 2 parts. Pretty much what you're going to have is 9 to the 3rd times 10 to the 3 times 6, because again you're going to drop it down there, which would be 10 to the 18th. 9 to the 3rd, of course, turns into 729 times 10 to the 18th. Of course, this is not scientific notation because this number is way too big. We need only one digit, so we turn that into 7.29. And then we do the balance game. Well, here's the difference between the balance that we did before. We know that this got smaller, but it got smaller by moving 2 spots, which means that this number needs to offset by 2 spots. So again, if this got smaller by 2 spots, that needs to get larger by 2 spots, making it 10 to the 20th. If you were only to move it 1 spot, then you'd add 1. If you were to move it 3 spots, then you'd add 3. But whatever it is, you need to make sure, again, even though you're doing the balance game, however many spots you move that decimal to put it where it belongs, that's how much that decimal needs to move over here. Alright. Toughest one you're going to see is probably something like this one. But again, this is just a matter of making sure you know what's going on. So the first thing we do is, and again, I'm not going to show work on this because it's not necessary on this part, is I'm going to do 3 times 14/15, which gives me 14 over 5. So I get S to the 14 over 5. I get T. Again, I'm going to multiply the 5 by the 14/15, so negative 5 times 14/15, which gives me negative 14 over 3. And then I'm going to multiply this, which gives me S to the 12th. Again, simplifying as far as we can, the first thing I want to do is make sure my S's get put together, kind of like combining like terms when we were doing that before. And so I need to take these 2 things. This is not multiplication. Remember, if this is 2 different exponents, we are adding them together. So we really are ending up with S to the 14/5 plus 12. And again, the good news is 14/5 plus 12 can be done in this thing here, giving me 74 over 5. So I end up with s to the 74 over 5. And again, the t stays the same because it really doesn't have anything to go with. And in the end, even though this is an ugly question, you end up moving whoever is unhappy to wherever they want to be. And so again, that was your first step. This is your second step. And your third step would be to put whatever is happy on the top. So s to the 74 over 5 over t to the 14/3. Again, that is an ugly answer. But as long as we did everything right and go back to make sure we did, again, we distributed 14/5 times 3, 14/15 times 3, which gave me this. I distribute 14/15 times -5, which gave me this. I distributed 3 times 4 to make 12. That is legitimate. Then I took these two things and added them because that is the multiplication property we learned in our last lesson, that these two things get added, giving us 74 over 5. And we brought this down because there was nothing there. And the last thing we did was follow our negative exponent property, which means that t needs to move down to the bottom. Again, keeping all that in mind, that's the stuff you have to know how to do. And again, that is why this final thought is important. And make sure you study, study, and study more. Again, just because you finish the homework, it doesn't mean you know everything. What happens is you finish the homework, the momentum of information is there because you just watched the video, you just worked some questions out, and then all of a sudden the quiz comes up that's out of order and it's got things that you haven't seen and you don't know what you're doing. Make sure you study as much as possible. Again, revisit the homework, work out a similar problem, but the key word here is fluency. Fluency is important because what it means is that if you can do something, for example, if someone sees 7 times 8 and they automatically know it's 56, they have a much better chance of passing a test versus somebody who sees 7 times 8 and then they have to think about it and process it for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then do a whole bunch of things and mess up before they come up with the answer. Fluency increases your chances of getting it right. And what I'm trying to tell you is with all the stuff you're going to be moving into this week, you've got division properties tomorrow, you've got, I think, quotient properties and something else going on after that. There's a lot of properties you're going to have to know by Friday, and if you are not fluent in each one, you will run the risk of making a small mistake that will cost you points. So with the fact that some of you are trying to work your way back into the passing range or into a point where you're not in trouble in terms of your grade, make sure you are preparing as well as you can. Again, this is the last easy test that you're going to see, or the easiest test you're going to see for about 2 chapters. So make the most out of it. Ask the questions where you need them, and again, work hard on not just finishing the homework, but knowing what's going on, understanding it, and again, gaining the fluency and the natural skill that you need. Good luck.